Hello, thank you so much for staying here on the AM show. I'm Bernice Abubedu-Lansa, sitting in for your regular Mama V. Owusu Abuache. Today we'll be talking about the Agyapa Royalties Deal. You may have heard by now that some 15 CSOs have asked President Akufo-Addo to suspend the agreement for further consultation. Well, we heard from Information Minister Kojo Nkrumah yesterday, who says, well, they are open for some engagement, that is government, but he won't say for sure if they're going to suspend the agreement altogether. Pretty shortly, Adam Senanu, who is co-chair of the corruption movement, will be joining me, anti-corruption movement will be joining shortly. We would also have Dr. Rashid Draman. He is executive director, the African Center for Parliamentary Affairs. That's very important because usually what we know is that when issues like this are being discussed in Parliament, is open for ordinary citizens, corporate CSOs like those we heard from yesterday, to also make a point in the discussion. Did we miss that? We'll be discussing all that. Pakwesi Anamwasichi will also join us. He's executive director for the Institute for Energy Security. We'll be discussing all that here on the AM show. Roland Walker is heading right now to Obom, where we understand that some 2 military men were attacked yesterday. There was a clash over a parcel of land, and there was some deployment after that incident. He's going there to monitor the situation. He'll be joining us as well. But now let me bring you a portion of that presentation by the CSOs yesterday on the Agyapa Minerals Deal.
We take this opportunity to call on His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo to, 1, acknowledge that though the Minerals Income Investment Fund and its special purpose vehicle may be legal without public input, it fundamentally goes against his pact with the Ghanaian people, particularly the mining communities, to cede 20% of mineral royalties to develop the communities. 2, to suspend the implementation of the Mineral Income Investment Fund Act until all documents relating to the establishment of the special purpose vehicle and its beneficial owners have been disclosed. As concerned Ghanaians, we sought to assess the transaction documents on the Mineral Income Investment Fund Act Secretariat, only to discover that it has none. 3, establish a multi-stakeholder process to review all options to optimize the mineral royalties in order to secure risk-free revenue to the state. Gold royalty is the most certain revenues to the state. Even though commodity prices tend to be cyclical, gold has only oscillated within 20%, which makes it a more stable commodity than oil. And with oil losing demand growth to alternative fuels, gold is expected to continue to exhibit some stability as a source of revenue. 4, to recognize that by its current approach to the implementation of the Mineral Income Investment Fund Act, government may appear to be encouraging citizens to transact business in tax havens. Ours is a struggle against the elite capture of resources that commonly belong to all Ghanaians. And we call on every one of us, regardless of our political persuasion, to join hands in safeguarding the national interest. In essence, Parliament has agreed to cede Ghana's royalties to a company to undertake investments at its pleasure. We take this opportunity to also draw the attention of the government to its own 2016 manifesto commitment in respect of the mineral sector. And here we refer to page 27 under Natural Resources, Land, Forestry and Mining, paragraph F of the NPP manifesto, where it pledged to ensure that mineral revenues are efficiently managed for the benefit of Ghanaians and to enact, I emphasize, and to enact a consolidated mineral revenue management law similar to the Petroleum Revenue Management Act 2011, Act 815, to guide the use of mineral revenues in strategic sectors of the economy. We, however, regret to note that what we are being served and against which we are holding this press conference is a far cry from what was promised. Indeed, the transparency and accountability provisions in Ghana's Petroleum Revenue Management Act have been hailed worldwide as a best practice. The 2017 Global Resource Governance Index placed Ghana's petroleum sector governance at the 13th best in the world, and the contest was among 89 countries, and the best in Africa in respect of the transparency and accountability provisions. Its value is reflected in the fact that Ghanaians today have adequate information on how their petroleum revenues are being managed on their behalf. Issues of poor spending decisions or monies that cannot be accounted for under current and previous governments are all matters of public knowledge, thanks to the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, as well as the annual reports of the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, PIAC. Ladies and gentlemen, Ghanaians will probably not have lost sleep over this Agyapa mineral income investment transaction if it had been orchestrated under an open and transparent regime such as the Petroleum Revenue Management Act provides. Indeed, what the government is intending to do with our mineral royalties would not have been permissible under the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. For instance, Section 5 of the Act.
So that's Steve Mantial. He's with ISODEC, speaking at that program yesterday where the CSOs gathered to basically ask the president to suspend the implementation of the Agyapa Minerals Royalty Deal. Well, this debate has been going on since the since it was passed in Parliament, and we've been picking reactions from a lot of people, including the Information Minister, who speaks on behalf of government. But let me speak now to Executive Director of the Institute for Energy Security, Pakwesi Anamoasechi. Thank you so much for your time here this morning. So we just had Mr. Steve Mantial there. He believes, per the MPP's promise in 2016, before I go to my question, there in your shots you can also see Mr. Andrew Agyapa Mercer, he's MP for 2nd D, and also Dr. Rashid Draman, Executive Director, African Center for Parliamentary Affairs. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Back to you, Pakwesi Anamoasechi. So we just heard from ISODEC. They're saying, per the MPP's 2016 promise, this was supposed to be similar to what we have in the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, but it's far from it. Is it the case that it has to be just as it is in terms of, and he cites examples like not using our oil as collateral and all that. Should all our minerals regulation or mineral revenue management policies be the same, really?
Well, thank you very much, Madam. I am sure what civil society organizations are looking for is the fact that if we have to monetize our mineral resources, it should be done in a more sustainable and responsible manner. And so there are other guidelines, just like one you mentioned, and it's worked for many years. So if you're introducing another one will expect that it will follow a similar pattern to ensure that we are not mortgaging our mineral resources.
All right, let me come to lawyer Agyapa Mercer. You are part of the committee that saw this all come to fruition. Was there any consideration at any point to make this similar to the Petroleum Revenue Management Act? If so, why is it not similar?
Well, let me say good morning to our cherished viewers and, of course, to my co-panelists and your good self. Indeed, at the time of the consideration of the Minerals Income Investment Fund, I had not been asked by the chairman of the Finance Committee to join them, but subsequently, I have been part of the proceedings of the Finance Committee. And so I cannot confirm whether indeed at committee, the consideration of whether this should be part or modeled along the side of the Petroleum Revenue Management Act was considered or not. But I recall the debate in the plenary where we're having a consideration of the bill. And indeed, the process of the enactment of the bill itself, if you ask me, was very transparent, contrary to the assertion that is being made by the civil society organizations. Because I recall that rationale itself was stated in the 2017 budget. It was re-echoed in the 2018 budget and was indeed also stated in the 2019 budget, where the finance minister clearly articulated government position and what it is that they intended to do. Passage of bills in this country at all times have been transparent and open.
Okay.
This bill was not taken under a certificate of urgency.
Exactly.
I would expect that it would have been published for civil society organizations to proffer views by way of submitting memoranda to Parliament.
I was just coming to that.
Okay, if a bill was tabled in 2018 in the full glare of the public and no representations were made relative to whether the NPP was being consistent with its 2016 manifesto promise or otherwise, and no comments to that effect came up from civil society at the time, one would wonder why today they are raising issues regarding the mode with which government is seeking to monetize mineral royalties, as has been articulated as far as 2017.
Mr. Mensah, nevertheless, they still have concerns that getting information about this particular deal is very difficult. They give an example of visiting a site and not having access to information. Why don't we have information about the deal?
I don't think that information about this transaction is difficult at all. Indeed, when you look at the memo that was submitted to Parliament, and the attendant agreements that were submitted, the only outstanding issue that my friends on the minority raised was with respect to the availability of the prospectus that would then enable Agyapa Royalties Limited to list on the London Stock Exchange as proposed. It was clearly indicated that the prospectus was still being worked on. And so it wasn't a document that was made available to the committee at that time. And that obviously, when the prospectus is ready, to the extent that this is a public listing, that document cannot be hidden from anybody. In any event, all the agreements that were submitted relating to the transaction are public. And I'm sure that as resourceful a station as you are, and I know your parliamentary correspondent has a copy of each of the transaction documents.
All right, Mr. Mensah, let me just...
It is shrouded in some secrecy. I completely disagree. Can never be true.
Okay, so there's a website, that according to the CSOs, they tried to access. They wanted documents relating to the establishment of the Agyapa royalties and beneficial owners, but they didn't find that. Why is that not there?
On the website?
On the MIPS website.
Which website?
MIPS.
MIPS website. But my sister, when you go to Joy FM's website, will you see the incorporation documents of Joy FM on that site?
So how do we access those documents as ordinary citizens?
The Ministry of Finance is indicating that, look, we have had an open door policy with civil society organizations. And that if this transaction has come up, we have consulted with Parliament and you have questions to ask. The Ministry of Finance is the appropriate place to go and ask whether these documents are available. In any event, the issue of beneficial owner, how does that even arise? When all the documentation indicates that Minerals Income Investment Fund, a wholly owned public entity set up by an act of Parliament, is, as we speak, the sole shareholder holding 100% equity in Agyapa. So how do you then proceed to ask who the beneficial owner is? How does that arise?
Okay. So still about the document. So the CSOs, you're talking about the Ministry of, but I'm just talking about an ordinary citizen sitting in the comfort of his home. Okay, how do they access that? How do they access the information? They want to know about this. How do they get to know?
You see, yes, I agree that it may be useful to improve on our access to public documents.
And transparency as well.
No, I don't have a problem with that.
But why is it unavailable?
If you go to the Ministry of Finance's website, all key documents that they present to Parliament by way of budgets and mid-year review and debt management report are all online. It may be necessary that going forward, and there's a legitimate statement to make that, look, all agreements that government enters into, okay, ought to be made public for people to access.
Exactly.
Online. I don't have a difficulty with that. And I don't see why, if documents are made available to Parliament and at that point they become public documents, we should not ask for further access for the citizenry, those who so wish and desire to access those documents, to be afforded some opportunity to access that.
You're a member of the committee. I'm asking why. Why is it not available? Why? Briefly, sir.
I'm coming to that, but it's useful, and I guess that the policymakers ought to take steps to find a means of putting these documents out there in the public domain so people can access. But I was saying that I do not know that it is a matter of practice that all agreements that government enters into are put on some public platform for people to access. However, I know as a matter of fact that the Parliament website has records of all documents that are presented to Parliament in soft copy. So anybody who so wishes to access can go there and access documents.
All right. Okay.
For their parents.
I'll come back to you shortly, but just on a point that you raised, let me get Dr. Rashid Draman, who is with the Parliamentary Affairs Institute. Thank you so much for joining the show. He's Executive Director for the African Center for Parliamentary Affairs. So we just had a point raised by Mr. Agyapa Mensah, which is something I've also been thinking about really after the CSOs came out yesterday to ask the President to suspend the deal. As we know, with parliamentary proceedings, this is public. It's open for people to send in memoranda. Should we wait until Parliament goes through an entire process before we come out, like the CSOs did, to voice out, or is it an indication of a flaw in the system?
Well, thank you very much. I don't know. I can't remember seeing this memorandum that the honourable member is talking about. Sometimes Parliament misses some of these steps. I'm trying to wonder how civil society organizations would miss not to submit, their views and issues that they want to be, to be considered by Parliament on such an important transaction. Having said that, I'm not saying that the honourable member is wrong. I'm just saying perhaps maybe a step might have been missed, because I've been part of so many processes where we've worked with civil society organizations to respond to memoranda submitted, issued by Parliament for CSOs and interested groups to submit their views. That I have to give it to Parliament. Parliament does it all the time. On this one, I don't know, because I haven't seen it, and maybe you might want to ask the civil society organizations in that
Sure.
sector to respond.
Sure.
But for me, if you allow me, I think it's very worrying. It's very worrying that over the years, and I'm not limiting this to the 7th Parliament, over the years, we've had so much controversy when it comes to some of these very, very important bills. And you have, most of the time, the minority walking out, and you have civil society siding with the minority. And when I say minority here, I mean, and the MPP has been in the minority before, and today we have the NDC. I mean, what that tells me, watching Parliament and watching proceedings over the years, is the fact that, I mean, it is not the case that our members of Parliament don't know what to do. I mean, the honorable member here is a very good example. He's a lawyer. I'm sure he might even know better than most people in civil society organizations. But what I'm learning is that I think we haven't gotten to the point where the disincentive for members of Parliament to do the right thing is more than the incentive for them to do the wrong thing. Mm. And I'm saying this because in countries where, you know, parliaments have gotten it right in terms of their scrutiny, in terms of their oversight and so on, they are at a point where the disincentive for them not to exercise their oversight responsibility properly and effectively is such that it's very high, more than the incentives that are before them in terms of doing things that are not quite transparent. Even if civil society missed that step, you have the minority walking out, they have concerns. You have a group of civil society organizations representing, I mean, a wider spectrum of society. I think the government ought to listen to the voices that are coming out. I believe in the interest of transparency and accountability, if people are saying that there's something wrong with this, I think we have to listen and go back and look at some of these files and see what is it that has been missed.
Let me take the co-chair of the Citizens Movement Against Corruption, Edem Senanu's thoughts on that point you ended with, Dr. Rashid. The bit of transparency. Now, the CSOs are saying, Mr. Senanu, that the fact that we can't access documents, the fact that this was not done as transparently as was done with the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, there is opportunity for corruption, not forgetting the fact that we've been told by the information minister that the son of the senior minister is involved, and it's raised a lot of questions, even about conflict of interest. Your take on this, sir? Hi, Mr. Senanu, we are struggling to hear you. Can you just cross-check if you've unmuted?
Can you hear me now?
Great, we can. Please proceed.
Okay. Good morning, and I think we need to do a bit of education here. So let me take us back to the Constitution. And I want to establish the fact that all good democracies are founded on three key pillars. One, the pillar of participation. Two, the pillar of information or transparency, as we call it. And finally, on systems and control. When we do assessments globally, we look at how these three key pillars are going. Ghana does very well on systems and control because we have the three arms of government, the laws, etc. In the past, we were very weak on transparency and accountability, undergirded by the right to information, but that was recently passed, except that it has not been operationalized. I want to focus a little more on participation, and I'll take us to Article 35(6)(d) of the Constitution. And I'd like us to pay attention to this. It states, the state should make democracy a reality. And it numbers two things. One, by decentralizing the administrative and financial machinery of government to the regions and districts. And two, by affording all possible opportunities for people to participate in decision-making in national life and in government. Now, it's the second part I want to highlight. This is a constitutional obligation. Note that the clause starts by saying that make democracy a reality. In other words, democracy is not real till you begin to provide all the platforms, channels, and spaces for people to participate. Let us not kid ourselves that representative participation is sufficient, especially in our context where our system of representative participation is not such that we have a systematic situation where our parliamentarians are engaging usually, regularly with their constituents or publics to be informed by what the desires and aspirations of the people are, such that that is what is being represented in Parliament. When the Constitution says provide all possible, afford all possible, that's what it means. So what the CSOs are raising is not just a matter of good sense or moral, advice, but it's a constitutional obligation of the state. And in all democracies, this is extended. In this case.
So sorry, let me just come in here. So Parliament, like we heard from Ms. Agyapa, went through the processes. Okay, they invited people to share their views and thoughts on it. What beyond that will mean participation for you?
Let's remember that our processes start with the executive. Until recently, when Parliament made opportunity for private members' bills, the executive that initiates this process then gets to Parliament, Parliament works on it. What civil society is saying, and the biggest civil society grouping that brings on board private sector is saying that in the extractives, are saying that they were not invited. And I'm going back to the constitutional clause to indicate that this was an obligation of the state. Indeed, it is one of the areas that we have been very weak, and it affects everything. If we had those platforms and spaces, if the state understood, the executive, that you must mandatorily do a stakeholder mapping, identify all the key stakeholders to a particular issue, bring them on board, and even above that, provide opportunities for any individual who thinks that he has a brilliant idea or input to give to do so. That's a constitutional obligation. Now, we also say in the public policy process that the legitimacy of any policy or law is to the extent of the participation of the people, because then they have ownership. So what we are doing is saying that there is a question of legitimacy of this law, this policy that is going to be executed, because there was not a thorough process, not just of tokenistic consultation, but of one where you have brought on board the expertise of the people who could contribute to ensure that the aspirations and desires of the people are captured and consolidated in what you intend to do. So these are serious issues, and let's not kid ourselves that it's just about the English or the semantic or a group of people. We are first citizens, because before you can describe us as a civil society group raising matters. No, we are first citizens. And we have a lot of expertise here, and we are saying that, look, the constitutional obligation has not been fulfilled. I've not even gotten into Article 21(1)(f) that talks about a right to information. So let's reconsider what has happened.
All right.
Civil society groupings that have the expertise were not brought on board to give input. The legitimacy of this policy is being questioned. Let's take a good look at it.
All right.
Thank you.
Pakwesi Anamwa-Sekyi, we are told that gold is trading at a historically high level, and this is expected to continue due to the coronavirus pandemic. Are we saying that it's not in our interest that we, for example, put this up on the London Stock Exchange, allow people to invest, and so that we can make more money, get a lump sum of $500 million? Are we saying that this deal is not good for Ghana? I just understand that we lost Mr. Anamwa there, but I hope we can get him back for him to respond to that. Let me come to you, Mr. Agyapa. Another concern of critics of this particular deal is that there was no real involvement of traditional leaders and opinion leaders in the communities where mining takes place for real. Hold on with your thoughts there, Mr. Agyapa. I understand that we've gotten Mr. Anamwa back on the line. So I was asking that we are being told, Mr. Anamwa, that gold is trading at a historically high level, and that is expected to continue amidst the coronavirus pandemic. So we are listed on the London Stock Exchange. We are allowing investors to come. We're getting a lump sum of 500 million. This is expected to augur well, considering that gold will still remain high, and we'll earn more from it, even through our royalties and investment in oil. Is this not a good deal? Is that what we are saying? Pakwesi Anamwa-Sekyi is Executive Director with the Institute for Energy Security. Too bad we're losing him there. Once again, let me come back to you, Mr. Agyapa Mensah. Back to the concern about the involvement of traditional leaders in whose communities the mining sites are. Were they involved? What is the plan for them as well?
Well, my understanding is
I beg to differ, madam.
Go ahead, Mr. Mensah.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. Mensah, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Yes, I was saying that it cannot be the case that the mining communities or the traditional rulers were not involved. If you check the composition of the board of the Minerals Income Investment Fund, there's a representation from the traditional rulers. Indeed, the chairman of that board is the MP for Takwa, which is indeed a mining community. And so, and then again, my understanding is that the portion of the royalties that goes to the traditional rulers are not being assigned to the Agyapa Royalties Limited as part of this transaction. Because if you recall, it was indicated in the documents that was submitted to Parliament that only 75.6 of the royalties are being assigned for purposes of the monetization that the Finance Ministry and the Minerals Income Investment Fund seek to achieve pursuant to the provisions of the Act. And so to that extent, whatever revenues that are due the traditional authorities, district assemblies, and all that have been ring-fenced, if you like. But you see, to respond to some of the comments that came from my colleagues who just spoke, particularly Edem and Rashid. You see, I don't think that members of parliament don't have the appetite to do the right thing. It's rather the incessant or if you like, unrepentant desire to follow the politics most of the time than the policy. Because otherwise, one would wonder why a process that had the input, significant contribution of the minority during its preparatory stages would now receive the objection of the minority when the vehicle and the transaction that the law intended to achieve is being rolled out. It's politics, pure and simple. And I don't speak for the civil society organization. I'm talking purely on the side of the minority. Okay? Look, it is not every private conversations that we have on the sidelines that we can make public, because I don't think that that in itself is fair. Okay? But the posture of the NDC, I can confirm to you, if you listen to their comments, if you listen to the comments of former President Mahama, clearly doesn't understand the transaction. Or if he does understand the transaction, he's only being political.
So what about his concerns makes you feel that he doesn't understand the transaction?
But of course I'm saying that it can either be two things, that he does not understand the transaction or that he's being politics. That's it. Because how different, except for the fact of this being an equity flotation, from the collateralization of the road fund proceeds. How different is this from the collateralization of the petroleum income revenue? Okay, the energy sector levy.
Okay.
How different is this from the GET fund proceeds collateralization? All those were debts that government had to take to enable us meet immediate development needs so that we can use the proceeds that come from the future to service them.
Okay, you're asking about differences. One clear difference is that this is not set up in a tax haven, and that's one of the concerns of the flag bearer of the NDC.
That in itself exposes the, if you like, the misunderstanding of the transaction. Royalties in the first place are a tax. And so how would you expect an investor or even the government of Ghana to pay tax on tax?
So why did you set it up in a tax haven then? What's the whole point?
Is to list, the objective is to list on the London Stock Exchange.
Okay.
Diageo is listed in Jersey. Tullow Oil is listed in Jersey. These are tax havens. And so it is not the case that setting up a company in a tax haven is intended to facilitate some illegality, but it has benefits, okay, that you would derive from the fact of the income from that entity not being subject to tax. That then entices or makes it appealable to the investor public in participating in the process. Okay, so we can have a conversation about whether it was right or wrong to set up in a tax haven, which I find nothing wrong with. But the substance of the transaction, is it where it is situated? Is that a complaint of the civil society organization?
Also, the involvement of persons related to people in government. In fact, the CSOs refer to it as elite capture.
A what capture?
Elite capture. Elite.
You see, I have been told that there was a international headhunting corporation that went through the process of selecting the persons who are running the Agyapa Royalties. And indeed, one of the requirements was that anybody that was selected ought to be a Ghanaian. My understanding was that they went through an extensive process, shortlisted some individuals, including some Ghanaians, and that the reason why the son of the senior minister was selected was purely on account of his background and track record in the investment banking space, and also particularly because over the period he had done some work with the mining and extractive sector. We can have a conversation about whether because your father or your uncle or your mother is in a political space, then you are not entitled to occupy any role.
I don't think the argument...
The competencies of the individual going through a competitive process that then arrives at the selection. I don't have any difficulty with that.
But is it only about...
Are these not tangential if you relate it to the real substance of the transaction?
Let me find out from Mr. Senanu.
People have raised significant sums of money
too bad. Let me bring Mr. Senanu there just to respond to the ending point of Mr. Mercer's submission.
To fund our development infrastructure in critical areas, invest in, so that over the period we can then pay the investors some dividends flowing from them. Of course, government of Ghana also participates in the distribution of the dividends. So we can have a debate. I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
But to call for the transaction to be terminated, to suggest that no consultations were held, to suggest that no opportunity for information or for people to participate in the
well, Mr. Agyapa Mercer, the CSOs are actually calling for a suspension. Too bad technology is not our friend today. We seem to be having a lot of delay and breakages in that submission by Mr. Agyapa Mercer, who is MP for Sekondi and Vice Chair for Communications Committee and member of the Privileges Committee as well. But if you can hear me and if you have a stable connection from you, Mr. Senanu, let me just pick your quick reaction to the bit on whether the son of the senior minister's involvement in all of this is really a matter of concern. According to Mr. Mercer, he's qualified. It was competitive, his selection. I just wanted him to give us the details of that international organization that went through the selection process, but we'll do that later. But really, he says it's not as important as the substantive matter.
First of all, let me say I totally disagree with him when he describes these as tangential matters. I mean, that cannot be the case. If you don't follow due process and you end up with a result and you are saying we should accept the result. I mean, we've seen that in our national level elections. You want to question the process to be sure that we follow the right process. Then the result is also acceptable. So that's not true. Also to suggest that civil society is suggesting. We are not suggesting. We are making statements of fact. We are saying that the key stakeholders in the industry, private sector, civil society, that ought to have been engaged in this process, were not engaged. They should provide the minutes, the reports that show that we sat at the table with the names of people, their numbers, the inputs gave. Let's not make this like I am saying this, you are saying that. That's not it at all. Provide the evidence and let's move on. Now to the substantive issue. I mean, Kofi is my classmate. were in Achimota together. But it does not mean that when something like this happens, we will not question the process. The fact is, if we had done a participatory and transparent process, everybody would have had equal opportunity so that the other sons and daughters of Ghana who are equally competent and could have had opportunity would have known.
But that's what Mr. Mensah says happened. Mr. Mensah says that happened.
Sorry?
Mr. Mensah just said that happened.
No, but we don't know. All of us don't know. Does anybody in this platform know? The rest of the people on this panel, was anybody aware that this thing was openly advertised and we all had equal opportunity to play this role? I'm not aware. And all the people in civil society, and that coalition is a big coalition. Rashid, I don't know whether you're aware, or Parkwesi. I'm not aware.
I would have applied.
You'd have applied. Thank you, Rashid. So let's not, it's as if we are just having an argument. This is not an argument. The vast majority of professionals in the sector are not aware of any such open request for CVs, for competencies in regard to this position. This is not to say anything about Kofi's competencies, but it's to say that let's look at the process. And please, let's not trifle with these issues. It's a dangerous thing when people begin to just try and put it in the corner of civil society or it is the minority party in an election year. No, there are constitutional obligations that have not been satisfied to respect, to promote, or to fulfill the rights of citizens. Let's make sure that that happens.
Mrs. Sananu, this conversation we are having reminds me of the debates that happened during the time the government announced its intention to partake in the Sino-Hydro deal. Really, they still went ahead. So this conversation we are having, we've been told by the Information Minister, Kojo Nkrumah, that yes, we'll try to have some engagements, but we are not going to suspend the implementation of this act. What does that tell you about government's commitment in really listening to what the CSOs are saying?
Well, first of all, I really wish that the Information Minister had not said that. It kind of says that we can ignore you. You have no importance to this matter.
No, he says they'll engage, but they won't suspend.
Yes, I have heard that, and I'm saying that that's a very dangerous route to take. We are in an election year. We are not raising this because we want to question your capacity to analyze or to move ahead. We are raising it because there are processes, there are constitutional obligations. You haven't done that. Now, if the key stakeholders in civil society with expertise, working together with private sector, say that this thing has been shrouded in secrecy, and we are not saying it just without justification. There is no evidence to show our participation, nor our consultation. We are not expecting a tokenistic, oh, we've heard you, then we'll go ahead. What you would do is to make members of civil society now begin to speak against the sitting government, which is not what we want to do. We are at this stage because we want you to understand that bring us to the table, let's begin to talk through it so that we can be guaranteed that the legitimacy of this policy is full. We have ownership also as the people. If you don't do that, what you do is to put people in a corner where now they must speak up in ways they don't want to. So let's reconsider it. At this point, this is friendly fire. We are talking about issues that we want you to confront and handle. If you're able to bring us to the table, let's sit down, let's go through it, and we are clear that, look, truly everything is overboard. That's fine. But let's not begin to make it an early fight where you're taking your gloves, you are punching us and telling us we are of no consequence. That would not be helpful.
All right, Dr. Rashid Draman, you have been sharing with us your thoughts, especially on the parliamentary processes. That's your specialty or expertise. But let me come to the issue of walkouts in Parliament. We know that it's been happening a lot. You did mention earlier that it's not the first time it's happened. But what does that really add to our parliamentary process? Really, so there's a conversation on the floor. You stage a walkout, and then later we hear you on the media, putting out your concerns. What kind of other alternatives should we be looking at in our parliamentary process so that, these walkouts and then subsequent media debates will end? Because sometimes really, Doc, you would agree with me that they lead to nothing.
Indeed, they lead to nothing. And then what the consequence of most of the walkouts is the kind of equalization that we hear all the time. And we had the honorable member, cite a number of examples of deals that were done under the NDC, and says that there is no difference between what is happening now and those deals. And I want to say that during those times, I remember quite well. The MPP in opposition raised its voice against some of these things. And today, if we are hearing from the honorable member saying that, what is the difference between what happened then under President Mahama and what is happening now, I find it a bit difficult. The reason why Ghanaians opted for change in 2016 is because we didn't agree with some of the things that were done under the previous government. And so if we come today and the whole discussion sometimes centers around trying to find ways of equalizing, I think it's not quite right. But let me also add that, look, I think in the history of democracy across the world, we cannot rely on the goodwill, simply on the goodwill of those who are in power to do the right thing. I think that is very well established in political history, in political theory, and so on and so forth. The government is doing its best. The members of parliament, from the majority, are doing their best, but we cannot rely just solely on the goodwill of those who form the majority and say the right thing is being done. And that is why, Adam is making the important point about participation. It's not just a token. We have to have real participation. And here you have civil society organizations that are working in the sector, coming out and saying, look, there's something wrong with this. If we indeed are following the Constitution and we want to ensure real and active participation of the citizenry, I think this is the time maybe to have some serious conversation.
Quickly.
And you see,
yes, Doc.
Sorry?
Please go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that our sub-region is going through a lot of turmoil, and democracy in our sub-region is quite delicate. We saw what happened a few years ago in Burkina Faso. We saw what happened recently in Mali. We saw what happened in Cote d'Ivoire. Please don't let us sit down and kid ourselves that our country has gone beyond this situation where our democracy is not delicate. And it is issues like this, as Adam was saying, now it's friendly fire. We want to have a conversation, but if it goes beyond that, and then it starts becoming a confrontation between civil society organizations and government and so on, and then you see maybe the process snowballing into other things. It's not good for our democracy. Our country has been cited as a very good example of democracy in the sub-region. I think let's make it so. Let us not say we have freedom of information and then it just becomes one law that is on the books and then we cannot operationalize it. We say we have a constitution, the constitution says A, B, C, D, and then we put it aside and do what we like. The information minister has been quoted as saying, yes, these concerns are fine, we have heard them, but we are going to go ahead. And like you said, we had a lot of concerns during the Sino deal, and it's going ahead. In the past, during the NDC, there were so many concerns people raised, including Mr. Mess's own party and group at the time in minority. But I mean, they went ahead. And I think the cumulative effect of all this is going to put our democracy in a situation where it becomes more and more delicate.
Well, quickly, gentlemen, we've run out of time, but I want to go back to Mr. Mercer quickly. So your government says that we've heard your concerns. We will engage you, but we'll still go ahead. I'm just wondering how that works, really. So you're still going to go ahead, and then you're engaging the CSOs. And when you arrive at a conclusion, what happens? I mean, I just feel that it's just going to be a back and forth. Just explain to us how that's going to work.
I don't think that there's going to be a back and forth at all, because the engagement really is to explain, okay, to the civil society organizations what the rationale and the structure of this transaction really is. Because, like I said, to quickly respond to the point that my good friend Rashid made, I'm not seeking to equalize at all. Indeed, the road fund collateralization took place under the NDC. The energy sector levies collateralization took place under the NPP. And indeed, the GET fund collateralization also took place under the NPP. So I'm not seeking to suggest that because the NDC did some transactions that we are doing this now, that should be sufficient. No, I'm saying that the nature of transactions by way of collateralization of future proceeds is not new, and that both governments have done these same transactions, except that the only distinction with this one is the vehicle that we are using, which is not to raise debt, but to raise equity and pay dividends from to investors who participate in the process.
All right. So you said the engagement.
To quickly to Adam, that look, Adam, I don't think that this is shrouded in any secrecy at all. If you look in the budget statement of 2017, 2018, 2019, it is in there in black and white. The bill was gazetted and published. That is open. The process of coming to Parliament for the consideration of the bill was published. It was open. Those who desired to submit memoranda were not prevented from doing so. Indeed, Parliament passed the bill in 2018. Post that, the minister came to Parliament in 2019 in paragraph 217 of the 2019 budget. It's there in black and white what it is that government seeks to do post the passage of the bill. So I don't think that this is some kind of tango with civil society. But also, civil society, I urge to recognize that, look, we have a government that is mandated to carry out a specific function. By all means, they would engage, but that if they engage and do not accept your view, that doesn't mean that they have erred. I would only urge that we collaborate, have a discussion on some of these things, and leave the government, which has a mandate, to then execute its decision.
Okay, so is that to suggest that, per what you just said, you'd engage civil society to explain to them what
Absolutely.
but you're not open for any inputs or any adjustments?
But of course, they can make an input. I don't have a problem, because what it is that Parliament has done is to give the Finance Ministry and the Minerals Income Investment Fund approval to carry out the transaction as submitted to us.
Okay.
As we speak, the listing of the company hasn't taken place. Okay. So if some input comes in that then it makes the structuring better, the prospectus better, by all means, I'm sure that the appropriate individuals who are officials involved will take those considerations on board.
Okay.
But this transaction cannot be said to be bad. It is a good deal. And we need to appreciate what it is that we are seeking to do and collectively lend our support. I am happy to have a consensus, a broad-based appreciation of the issues and the support of key stakeholders. But with respect to the NDC, we know what it is that they are seeking to do.
And what is that?
Politics. Simple.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. Andrew Agyapa Mercer is MP for 2nd D and Member of Parliament's Privileges Committee, and also Adam Senanu, co-chair of the Citizens Movement Against Corruption. We also had Dr. Rashid Draman, Executive Director of the African Center for Parliamentary Affairs. Unfortunately, we lost Pa Kwesi Anomah-Sechie, Executive Director of the Institute for Energy Security. We couldn't get much from him. But these gentlemen and I have been discussing the controversial Agyapa Royalties Deal. If you missed any part of it, just get onto our YouTube page and update yourself. But thank you, gentlemen. Enjoy the rest of your day. But coming up shortly here on the AM show, I'll be hosting the Alliance for Women in Media Africa. We're going to be having a conversation of the status of women in the Ghanaian media. You want to stay for that.